Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today at this Your Overseas Home webinar. It's great to have so many of you with us, whether you're watching live or demand. So my name is Greta and I'm a Business Development Manager at Your Overseas Home. So today we'll actually be chatting with Emma Belgum, who is a paralegal at JLCA, about your legal considerations you should think about when moving to Spain. So before we start, Emma, please could you introduce yourself and share with our viewers what JLCA does?
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Greta. Just a little bit about the firm. JLCA Lawyers is a Spanish legal firm. We've been operating for over 20 years. We are specifically Spanish lawyers. We speak many languages within the company. We consider ourselves a multilingual office, and we have bases not just in Spain, but also in the UK and in the US. But with languages, we include French, German, many others. We're a multidisciplinary firm. Although today we're going to be talking obviously about property purchase, we also cover other extrajudicial areas such as residency. We also cover civil and criminal matters. So we are a full service legal firm. So whatever your question might be, then we have got the legal advice here for you. Moving on to obviously the most important thing, and that is if you are thinking of buying a property in Spain. The one thing that we would always recommend is that you have an independent lawyer working for you when you're purchasing property. This is because we only have an interest in your rights. We're not linked to anybody, we're entirely independent. So the importance on all of our work is to make sure that you've got the best information and you can make a clear decision about what you want to do at each stage. It's important to understand that there are very big differences depending on which area that you're purchasing in Spain and what type of property. Now, although we are based the main office in Alicante, we do cover the whole of Spain, including the Balearic and the Canary Islands. Now, each of the autonomous regions have different taxes that are applied. So depending on that region, the price of the property will change depending on which area it is. For example, if you were purchasing a property in the Costa Blanca, the resale tax is 10%, whereas if you're purchasing in the Canaries, it's 6.5%. But then you have a difference in what sort of property you can purchase for the money. So it's always really good to have an understanding of these differences while you're having a look at properties, so you have a real feel of what the actual price is. The other thing that varies as well is the types of properties. You have new build or off plan, and you have resale properties previously owned, and they have different applications as well. Now, the buying process in Spain is quite different to that in the UK, in that we have 3 stages, which I'll go into in more detail a little bit later on. The point is that it's not the same as the UK, so it's important that you have a full understanding of how it works here so that you're applying appropriate actions specific to buying here and not thinking in terms of what it's like to buy in the UK. There are lots of reasons that people are buying property as well. There could be for a holiday home, something that you're just going to be using yourself and perhaps a few family members. You might be thinking about purchasing in terms of investment, or you might be purchasing with the idea of eventually living in the property and becoming resident in Spain. It's important to have these ideas clear in your head beforehand because we can give you appropriate advice towards that. For example, if you are planning on for investment, then you're going to be needing a tourist license. So we can talk to you about what you need in order to get the tourist license to make sure that you're looking at the right sort of properties in order to be able to do that. The last thing that I would sort of summarize is NIE numbers, which I'm quite sure people have heard about. It's kind of the equivalent of your national insurance number. It's a fiscal representation. It is required for purchasing a property in Spain. It's relatively simple to apply for. We can do it on your behalf. You can do it yourself through the Spanish consulate in the UK. It's needed for the final signing of a property. It's not needed just to have a look at property or to put a deposit down, but it is needed for the final stage. Okay. So just to talk about the process in a nutshell, as it were, you're looking generally at a 3-stage process. The first part is that you come out to Spain, you look for a property, you found something that you really like, and you've decided to say to them, yes, I'm interested, and this is what I'm willing to pay for the property, whether it's a full price or whether you're making an offer. If that offer then is accepted, you will have a reservation agreement with them. Now, typically it could be between 3 and 6%, depending on 3 or 6,000 euros, depending on the area. Can be a little more depending on the value of property, but typically around that amount. And that is a holding deposit. This reservation agreement is purely an agreement to take the property off of the market, to agree your initial price for purchasing and initial conditions. You might have talked about furniture, for example, but then with the owners to sign the next contract, which is the private purchase contract or deposit contract. Now, this is very, very important to get right. It is binding to notary, and it's so important to make sure that they've got all the clauses in there for your protection. You also have to pay 10% of the property price at this point, minus what you've already paid for the reservation. So again, it's a really important point to reach. Within that contract, we will, as your lawyers, have already started the equivalent of what you would call the searches in the UK. We will be looking at the different registry offices, making sure that everything coincides, that the owner is correctly registered for selling the property, that there's no encumbrances, etc. We'll also check with the local town hall to make sure there's no infractions, so that you know that you're buying with confidence. There's other documents specific to the property that we'll be looking at and we would want provided, and anything that isn't provided straight away, we can write into the private purchase contract. So if there's any problems later on, then you're able to terminate the contract and get your money back. So this is all for your protection and to make sure everything is exactly as you expect it to be. I would say as well, if you're looking at a property and you've got plans of what you want to do to it, you're thinking about maybe extending it or doing particular changes, it's a good idea to have a chat with us at the early stages of what your plans are, because certain properties can only build a certain amount of area depending on where they are and what the registration of the land is. So it's important to know if you've got plans that you are actually going to be able to do it before you go too far down the line. But that is one of the many things that your lawyers are here for. Once you've signed the private purchase contract, we continue doing the paperwork right up until the final signing, which is before a public notary in Spain. Now, this can either be done with yourself in person, or we can attend on your behalf with a power of attorney. Once the property is registered, we will then set up all your direct debits in your name, set up from your bank account so that you're running and using the property. Obviously, once you've purchased the property, there's some other things to have in mind. We have lots of ancillary services to help you with that. That is things such as property taxes that you'll be paying afterwards. And we would always recommend that if you have a Spanish property, that you have a Spanish will in place. Now, I have run through quite a lot of information, and I'm more than happy to expand on any of those. I thought I'd refer back to you, Greta. I mean, if you've got particular questions that are coming in or particular areas that you'd like me to go into more detail with, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. That was really useful, actually, to kind of see how you guys really help buyers. But yeah, I mean, to our viewers, we invite you to, ask questions in the chat box, and then I can ask them to Emma. That would be great to kind of use your knowledge when you're here with us. Obviously, so nice of you to give your time to us. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to ask now.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for some questions, I mean, what I've done is I've run through quite a bit about purchasing resale property. I can explain a little bit the differences with Offplan. A lot of it is very much the same kind of process, but obviously you're purchasing a property that hasn't yet been built, or so it may have a long time before it's completed, or it may have a short time. We go through a lot of the same work, although in addition, we're going to be making sure that the licenses are in place, that if there's bank guarantees which are attached to it, that not only are they set up but actually paid, so that you know that your money is safe all of the way through. So the other difference is taxes. They're taxed quite differently in that you purchase an off-plan property as a price plus IVA, and then you pay a new registration tax, which is smaller, rather than the property transfer tax, which you have for the resale. The rest of the process is very much the same.
Sure. Okay, great. And on the whole, we have got a question. I mean, would you have any advice on securing a mortgage and how that relates to buying in Spain?
Yeah, if you're looking at having a Spanish mortgage, it's a very good idea to have a chat first of all with a mortgage broker, because they can run through the options for you. In general, you need to bear in mind that non-residents in Spain, the maximum mortgage really that you'd be able to look at is about 50-60% of the property. You also need to bear in mind the actual structure of a property purchase here, where you have the property price, that is all part of the mortgage. Then after that, it has to be notarized, it has to be registered, and the tax has to be paid. These are all separate too and go on top. So you need to have that in mind when you're working out your figures. In terms of the actual mortgage itself, the process is a little bit different in that there is a requirement to go to the notary twice. First of all, you have to sign for the conditions of the mortgage, and then a couple of weeks after that for the notary itself. And then obviously there'll be some additional costs for the mortgage itself, but that will be provided to you with your offer. So they'll explain all of that. But the mortgage deed is actually notarized as well and registered in Spain.
Okay, super. That's really interesting. Thank you. And someone has asked, do they need a building survey?
It's a very interesting question, actually. It's something I've discussed quite a lot with people. In Spain, it's not traditional to have a survey in the same respect that you do in the UK. It's not that it's just you don't have that kind of specific profession, if you like. You have architects which are qualified, which can do this work, but it isn't as usual. The reason being is that a lot of the checks that we would be doing on the property is looking as to whether the property is habitable, and it has to be certified by the town hall and such. However, this being said, and also a lot of newer buildings have still got their building guarantees 10 years and such in place. If you're looking at older properties and you do have some concerns about the construction, there's absolutely no problem with arranging a survey as well as the usual checks. And you know, we have more than happy to do that. What we would normally suggest in such an instance would be that we would explain that to the sellers at the time, so that we can actually then write it into the private purchase contract that the purchase is subject to this survey. So again, if there is any unforeseen problems that brought out, then you're able to come out without losing your money.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, Rob has asked, how does the planning permission process work in Spain?
It is run through the town hall. And it sort of depends in the first place. When you are talking about doing some work on the property, we are able to find out before you even start what a maximum build area that you are allowed on a property. And that is dependent on what type of land it's built on. You know, it can be urban land, some rustic land, but there will be a specific square meterage of what can be built, whether a pool can or can't be built, how big these things are. So all of that kind of thing we can actually find out relatively simply from the town hall before you even purchase. When you're actually going through to do works at a later stage, it is not much different from the UK in that you would be applying for planning permission through the town hall. You would have to submit plans for them to approve in order to then go ahead with works.
Okay, sure, yeah, that makes sense. And Sue has asked, can you please go into the 90-day rules for non-residents?
Yeah, this one does come up over and over again. It is terrible. I mean, that's the one thing about Brexit that everybody hates. 90 and 180 days. You have to think of it in terms of two separate parts. When you start, your first time you come over to Spain, you are starting a clock which lasts 180 days. It can be any time in a year, but that first point that you arrive in Spain, that's where your 180 days comes in. During that 180 days, you can spend anywhere up to 90 days. Once you have used up your 90 days, or you get to the end of the 180 days, whichever comes first, then you would need to leave Spain, and then you come back and you restart your next 180 days, and you have the same then for the following. It doesn't matter if you don't use up your 90, it makes no odds. That's still the maximum you can do up until the end of that 180 period. And that 90 days can be anywhere you like, all lumped together, a week here, a week there, whichever you want to do. It's just about the numbers.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it doesn't all need to be in one bulk, it can be spread out.
No, No, I mean, a lot of people here have got holiday homes where we are. We see a lot of people coming in and out. You've got some that like to spend a couple of months during the winter. Obviously, it's a little more difficult now because they can't have as long as they would have done before without having to trip back into the UK. But you have a lot of people that just come out for long weekends where they can to come and enjoy their property, and where they get a little bit of time off work to do that. And they just do that all the way through the year.
Oh, so nice. Great. Okay. And can the seller pull out after a reservation contract, Emma?
Well, this is the thing. With the reservation contract, you are agreeing to hold the property and such. So if they just took your money and ran, then obviously we would go after them for that money back. It is a signal that you are in a serious buying position. If there is a particular reason, as in the person hasn't signed the contract and it's gone on for months and months, then obviously they'd be fully within their right to say, look, this has gone on too long, you haven't gone any further, I need to put my property back on the market. So it depends on the circumstances, but normally when you have that signal that you're going forward and then you move forward to the next one, then it is much more serious. In the UK, you have obviously gazumping is a horrible thing which does happen. It isn't something that tends to happen in Spain because you are putting money down from the very beginning and having to sign binding contracts right at the very start. So as I say, it's a lot more protection in that respect.
Okay, great. That's really useful. Thank you. And how much on the whole does JLCA charge for these services?
I wouldn't like to just give figures because, as I've said to you, we've talked about all sorts of different scenarios, different areas, different types of, and each of them. We work on a fixed fee basis and we try to keep them reasonable. Anybody that wants an actual breakdown of exactly what the costs, legal fees, and other expenses that would be generated specifically to the situation, then I can do so. There's no problem at all.
Great. Okay, thank you. And what is the purchase tax in Andalusia and Valencia?
Okay, in Andalusia, it is 7%. At this time. It's one of the lowest of the region because they are going for trying to be as most tax efficient. Valencia comes under Comunidad Valenciana, which is 10%. However, what you need to balance is that the same money will buy more property in the Costa Blanca region than it will in the Costa del Sol region. So when you're looking at them, you have to look at the sort of the two of them together to have a final price of what the property is that you're looking at, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I would always say it's really important if you're buying a property is to come out and look at the area and see which one fits you best, because that's the most important. That is the place that you're going to be settling and where you want to spend time.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And do you have any additional advice for US residents?
US residents, it's exactly the same purchase process as it is for the British ones. There's no differences, and there's also no differences in the buy and purchase for residents and non-residents. There is no changes. We have a lot of US clients, not only looking for holiday homes but residency, and again, in actual fact, the residency applications are very similar between the two.
Okay, that's really interesting. And at what point, Emma, would you say someone's deemed to be a Spanish resident and no longer a UK resident?
You have to actually formally become a resident. It isn't a case of you can't just turn up here, stay in a time and suddenly become resident. You have to go through a specific process. There are many different options, and all of the different residencies are based on what you're going to be doing in Spain, whether it's going to be coming here not working, which is a non-lucrative visa, one of the most commons, whether you are coming across as a digital nomad, whether you're coming across as on a work visa, student visa, all of these different things, but you actually physically have to go through a process, even with an EU passport. Although an EU passport is very, very helpful and much easier to process, you still have a residency process to go through. The majority of these as well, once you go through them, you have to spend a minimum of 183 days in Spain. There are a couple of exceptions, the golden visa, for example, but in the majority of cases, you will actually be living here 183 days, which makes you fiscally resident.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you. And Charlotte's asked, do I need to pay for an NIE number, and will my council office be able to help with this?
Yes, you will need to pay for an NIE number, and no, the council office will not be able to help with this. An NIE number, you would need to say there's several options to do so. The most reasonable option is if you're happy to go through yourself through the consulate in the Spanish consulate in the UK. It's not a huge amount of money, but obviously it is an investment that you would need to make, and it's the actual consular fees for processing.
Okay, thank you. Robert said, I have a UK will. Can the Spanish will mirror this?
We would always recommend, if you've got a Spanish property, that you make a will in Spain. And obviously for your UK assets, have a UK will. The reason for having a will in Spain is because properties and such are registered, and having the will in place already means it's much quicker, cheaper, and easier for those left behind to process. In terms of what the contents are of that will, you can decide what those contents are going to be. You explain to us how you want your will set out, and we would set it out that way. One of the advantages of also doing the will in Spain is that you are able to enact a clause in there to say that you are specifically using the rights of your nationality, not of your residency, for example, if you're living in Spain or renting, having a property in Spain, so that you're not bound by the forced heirship in Spain. So you'd be governed by the UK in that respect.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I think that's constantly a big debate actually between UK or Spanish will. So yeah, thank you, Emma. And what are the rules for gaining full residency for a full-time living in the property, not a holiday home, but full occupancy for retirement?
That would be the non-lucrative visa if it's for retirement. It's a process which is done. It starts in the UK through the consulate. It can't be done from Spain, so it's very important to plan ahead for this. It has a series of requirements as to show you've got sufficient income to support yourself. You will be needing medical cover. There's other documentation that you'll need to provide, which is legalized, translated, and time sensitive, in order for it to be submitted at the application in the British consulate, the Spanish consulate itself. Once you have that appointment and the paperwork is dropped in, you also need to be aware that your passport will need to be submitted as well. So when your application is waiting for approval, you will not be able to travel outside of the UK. It's very important when you're thinking in terms of your planning, because you need to have somewhere to stay. Quite often we've had someone, they're selling their property, their funds are going to be used in order to support their funds for being in Spain, but then they can't come to Spain until it's been approved. So you have to have somewhere to stay in that interim before you come over to Spain to become resident. All of these things we can discuss on a personal basis, because everybody's situation is different. But once you have approval, you then have 3 months to come to Spain and to obtain your residency card and do your fingerprints here. Again, we help you with that appointment so that you're all set up for doing that. So the idea is that you would come over to Spain as soon as possible after that, making sure you have a stamp in your passport as you come through. And then we can process that. As soon as you've got that residency card, that then means that you are resident in Spain, and obviously you can travel back and forth to the UK, but you will then need to be in Spain for a minimum of 183 days. Now, you will become fiscally resident at this point. That doesn't mean that you're going to be double taxed on your income from the UK. You would still be taxed at source, but you will become have to present income tax annually here in Spain as a resident, and they will take into account your income and the tax paid against the Spanish scale, which may mean that some people have to contribute additionally in Spain, but you kind of have to balance that then against the lower cost of living here. So I'm not sure what happened to Greta then. I mean, there's plenty of other points I could go into in more detail if it's helpful. In terms of, we've had this question on residency. The other common forms of residency as well, we have the golden visa. That is where somebody has purchase an investment of 500,000 euros as a minimum. It's advantageous in that you have an option if you wish. If you're here less than 183 days, you still have the freedom of Europe and the Schengen area. However, you wouldn't need to be fiscally resident in Spain, so you can remain resident in another country, which works quite well for some people. Another important point, actually, I would like to say about the non-lucrative visa, because work visas can take a very long time and are very specific to achieve. Something that a lot. Sorry, you're back. Something that a lot of people are doing at the moment. So I've got a really weird echo going on. This is something a lot of people are doing, sort of as a bypass to that idea, is that if you are a non-lucrative resident for a year, so obviously funding yourself for 1 year, once you've been here for a resident for 1 year, then you can apply on renewal for a work visa if you found work locally, and it's a lot simpler to be able to start working either for a company in Spain or setting up as self-employed after you've been here for a year than trying to do it originally from a work visa from the UK. So that's also a very common option that people use to try and get around that way of setting up in Spain.
Great, okay. Yes, sorry about that. We had a few technical difficulties, but we're back. So I think we've got time for one more question, which is, should I take a buying agent when inspecting a property, and when do you negotiate prices?
This is entirely. Is this got that echo again?
Sorry.
This is entirely up to you. In terms of negotiating the property, you can make an offer to your agent, the person who's showing you the property, and they'll relay it to the buyer, to the seller. Some people are already directly talking to the seller. The point is more, once you're actually fixing it in writing with the reservation and the private purchase contract, you can involve your lawyers to make sure that everything is actually being done correctly and above board.
Super. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, everyone, and thank you, Emma. So we strongly recommend you to get in touch with JLCA directly just to discuss your requirements in detail. And as Emma said, every situation is different. So we'll be in touch with your details shortly, Emma. But yeah, before we finish, I'd like to invite you to leave us a review on Trustpilot if you found this webinar helpful. So yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, and happy property hunting.